Hey guys, it's me, Whoop, back with another Stronghold Crusader build. In the last episode we built Hovel number 6, which I turned into the hookah or T-bar. And in this episode we're going to build the last of the 7 hovels. Just like in the previous episodes, I don't want to spend a lot of time explaining how I assembled the main building, and I'm going to focus mostly on the details, which I gotta admit are really intricate this time. I might have gone a little too crazy, but everything in due time. Let's begin with the walls of the building. I'm using the plasterboard again, where I stripped off the brown paper layer with a chisel, then scraped the surface with a spatula to make it smooth, used an angle and a saw to cut the pieces to size, and to get a clean cut on the grey paper layer I used an X-Acto knife. I marked the holes for the doors and windows, and I was pretty sure that this narrow strip wasn't going to survive the cutting process. This one on the right wall is also pretty narrow, but it's connected on 2 points, so that should be alright. After cutting the holes out, I used my Dremel wall connecting jig to make some grooves into the walls so I can connect them with wooden strips later on. This strip didn't break, but this one did, and in order for it to hold I had to glue these 2 walls together already. This connection is only a temporary solution, it really isn't going to be stable until I glue all the 4 sides together. And the second crack is also about to happen. But let's put this aside for now and continue with the doors. On Hovel number 7 we have 3 doors. These 2 make sense to me, with this one I'm not so sure. Do we really need 2 doors? I doubt that the first floor is divided into 2 rooms. Maybe it's a staircase to get to the second floor. Whatever its purpose may be, I still have to make all 3 doors. I cut 4 wooden strips to size and glued them together with 2 square sticks. On the in-game building we can see 3 horizontal strips, but before adding the middle one I wanted to make the handle. I used a piece of thin sheet metal, drilled a hole in each corner and 2 in the center just to get the Dremel bit started. I bent another narrow strip of this sheet metal into this shape. Glued the 2 parts together, which doesn't create a very strong bond, but it also doesn't have to, because I'm gluing this part into a mortise I cut out on the door. To secure it properly, I then drilled the 4 corner holes through the door as well, glued some tiny nails inside, cut them off and hammered them flat. Now we can add the 3rd horizontal strip, where I also cut a mortise into to go over the handle. Just like on the previous doors, we have these 2 strips on the sides, which I connected with half-lap joints. After the first strip, I somehow noticed that the handle is still missing. In the previous episodes I used a thin wire and pressed the ends together, which wasn't working all too well. So this time I tried some solder wire and just heated it up very shortly to join the ends together. Now we can hide the ugly seam inside here and glue the 2nd strip on there as well. And with that process I made 2 more doors. The one on the right is mirrored because here we can clearly see that the strips are on the right. I still placed the handle on the left though, which technically makes more sense, because I'm imagining the hinges to be on the side of the vertical strips. So this one should also be here, but it is like that on the in-game building. The door for the 2nd floor is a little smaller, and maybe this tiny dark spot here is also supposed to be a handle, but I just left it like this. Now I can install the hinges in the same way I attach the handle. I also made this tiny simple window blind, which is basically just a small door. The windows on the 2nd floor on the other hand are a bit more intricate. I started with making a thin frame with half-lap joints and gluing some sticks diagonally across the frame. To get this pattern I then cut these mortises into the sticks to glue even more sticks onto the frame, cut the excess off and hide the edges with another frame. Before connecting the walls I wanted to take care of one more step, making these beams. In reality they are most likely there to hold the roof or the floor of the 2nd room up here, which means they're probably going through the building. Here I cheated a little because I wanted to make a removable roof again to see inside the top of the building, and these beams would just be in the way. So my solution to that was to just drill some holes into the wall to later glue some fake poles into. Okay, while I'm connecting the walls in the background, I wanted to explain what this hovel is supposed to be. We can't see any distinct features that suggest a particular function of the building. We have a rug, 2 pots, a wooden box or cage or something like that, and the most noticeable feature, a clothesline. So I just thought about what these details might have in common, and I think this could be a weaver's workshop that makes rugs, that stores dyes to color the fabric in these pots, and that hangs up the finished rugs to dry. What the cage is for, I really don't know, but something else. It probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense to do all of this inside the hovel. In Stronghold 2 we can actually build a sheep farm and a weaver's workshop, but in Stronghold Crusader there is no such building. So let's maybe stop overanalyzing everything and just make hovel number 7 the weaver's workshop. Once I connected the walls, I wanted to make the removable roofs. For the first floor I used the exact same method I used in all the previous episodes, which is cutting a flat particle board to size and pouring some gypsum onto it. For the second floor I had to make it differently because on the in-game building we can see some wooden planks sticking out of the plaster. The planks seem pretty dark, so I burnt a strip of wood and scraped it up with a steel wire brush. Then laid some very thin wooden strips inside the building and glued the burnt ones on there. I made a mold out of some MFC boards and mixed the gypsum together.
Wiggle, wiggle, wiggle.
While that was drying, I covered the outside walls of the building with the slow drying plaster mixture to cover up the seams and other blemishes, and because it mixes well with the brown powder to create this desert building look. The outside of the building got its treatment and the wooden parts and the inside of the building were already getting jealous, so let's cover them with the vinegar stain. Normally I was using this paintbrush to apply the stain, but on hovel number 6 I used it to brush some epoxy resin onto the hookah. I obviously forgot to wash it out, that's why I'm using this brush. For the fake poles I used the good old hand drill method to free the holes from the plaster and then cut a stick to this shape. Burnt it, scrubbed it, glued it inside the building and did this 7 more times. At that point I also started to think again how to access the second floor. The in-game building gives us no clue, so I had to come up with my own version. A ladder or staircase inside the building would take up a lot of space, especially on the tiny room on the second floor, which means I gotta build some stairs on the outside again. I made them similar to the ones on hovel number 6. I drilled 2 holes in the walls, glued some burnt sticks inside and glued 2 more wooden boards on there to create a wooden platform. Then I cut out these parts on the baseboards where the steps are going to be, burnt these sticks and the steps and glued everything together. Like this we have some really simple stairs leading up to the second floor. The second floor that doesn't exist yet. Now we can begin with the details outside the building, starting with the clothesline. Looking at the in-game building we can see that the 2 poles are square at the bottom, then round most of the way and end with a smaller, wider cylinder. I could have made it on the wood lathe, but for some reason I thought that using the turn square stick into round stick method would be easier. Drilling a hole in the side here was a bad idea because the wooden strip that's holding the second floor is right beneath there. I had to add this piece on the bottom here to stabilize them, but that's a trade I'm able to make. And after tying a piece of string on there, we have a clothesline. I did make the poles a bit too bulky and in-game it's looking like they are further apart, but this is still looking alright to me. Next up we have the clay vases that I made out of white air drying clay. There's not much to be said here, other than I'm always having a hard time making pottery, because after 10 minutes of shaping, I made a pot that looked nothing like the one on the in-game building. Let's move on to the cage, for which I used half-lap joints to make 2 simple wooden frames, then glued a bunch of sticks on there vertically, connected the 2 parts with more wooden sticks, and on the front I glued these 2 wider boards on there that form a gap into which I can slide a lid. I'm still not sure what this is supposed to be, but let's just say the weaver owns a pet that he has to transport sometimes, I don't know. Last but not least, there's the rug, which I made the same way as in Hovel number 6. Print a picture of a rug onto a piece of cloth, cut it out and pull out some of the vertical strings to make some bristles. Okay, the outside of the building is done and now we can get to the fun part. The details inside, where I admittedly exaggerated a bit, but the weaver just needs a loom. I had to look up a couple of videos on how looms work, and the overall mechanism isn't that hard to understand, but fitting everything inside the miniature build was quite the challenge. And I hope together with the SketchUp drawings I can explain the building process in a way that's somewhat understandable. I began with cutting some 8x8 and 4x4mm sticks on my bandsaw and cut them to size on the saw guide to make the main frame. I made 2 square frames with half-lap joints out of the 4x4mm sticks and cut off this part of the 8x8mm sticks on both ends. Before connecting them though, I wanted to drill the holes in the thicker poles. Poles. I drilled 4 holes in here and later filed them square to connect them like this. Then I drilled 2 more holes for the back beam that can stay round because this part should be able to rotate, and another 2 smaller holes that I'm gonna come back to later on. I tried my best to glue the frame together nice and square, and now we have this cube with the back beam already in place. The next step was to glue the 2 connection pieces inside the poles, and I left 15mm sticking out on each end because we still have to add something later on. With these in place we can cut the mortises for the planks that go across here. I messed up a little on this piece, the middle part broke off, but that doesn't really make a big difference. We need these cross beams here as a stopper for the handles. Those are the parts that move up and down in turn. Another part we need for the handles are the 4 rails to hold them in place that I made by cutting a groove into this piece of wood. These rails should ideally be vertical, so I had to glue a little strip on the top of the frame because I made a small mistake, but that's an easy fix. The handles themselves were pretty easy to make, because I made some that look similar but that don't function the same way as the real ones do. A thin frame out of half-lap joints, a white string wrapped around it, and that's it. Now that we have these 2 handles that fit inside the rails, we need to make the mechanism that moves them up and down. So we need something that pulls down the one on the front and pulls up the one on the back with the same move, and vice versa. On the top I decided to make a primitive version of a pulley that should kinda work like this, and on the bottom we need some foot pedals. The pedals were pretty easy to make, I simply used a thicker piece of wood and cut it out like this. Now if you remember the 2 tinier holes on the frame, these are there because they're going to be the rotation point for the pedals. I'm imagining this to work as follows. The front handle and the short pedal are connected with a string like this. Then the front handle is connected with the back handle like this, with the pulley on top. And the back handle is again connected with the second longer pedal like this. So with each push of the pedal, the position of the handles should switch. I tried to connect as much as possible before enclosing the handles in the rails, and I also made these 2 very simple parts that are holding the quote-unquote pulley that is just a round stick. As you can see, I decided to connect the handles with each other with 3 strings, hoping it can balance out some of the uneven tugging of the single string on the bottom. And I also added these vertical pieces of wood to keep the handles inside the rails. At first it wasn't as smooth as I wanted it to be, but after some back and forth and a little bit of grease, it actually worked pretty well. Next up is the so-called raddle, which sits on the back here and is there to divide the strings and evenly space them to keep them nice and parallel. Nothing interesting going on there, it's a stick with a bunch of holes where I glued some nails inside. That was the last part of the back side, so let's continue with the front, where we have to make the beater with the reed inside. For the reed I had to put some pieces of wire through a strip of wood, and we can't drill a hole more precise than drilling it with the wire itself. It would have been better to put the two pieces of wood together, drill through both of them, put the wire inside and pull them apart, but I did it the cheap way by drilling the holes into the bottom piece only and gluing the two strips together like this for the top piece. Now that the beater and the pedals are inside, we can connect the strings with the pedals, and yep, this is working pretty good. The only thing left for the front is to glue this stick across here so that the beater has something to beat on, and now we can move on to the side. Wait, we're not done yet? Oh, come on. Right now the back beam is just a stick, but on a real loom there's a ratcheting mechanism built into it. This allows the back beam to rotate clockwise and wind up the loose strings, while the pawl is preventing it from turning into the opposite direction. So to make this ratcheting mechanism I used a fret saw to cut out a ratchet wheel from a piece of hardwood. Then I messed around a little bit to find out what's working, and I had to slightly modify the basic frame by adding a longer stick on the bottom here to create a turning point for the pawl, which is this piece of wood here that's stopping the wheel. Now we also need a part that's pressing it against the wheel here, and another mechanism with which it can be released in the front of the loom. That's why I made this lever with a spring at the bottom. Like this, the ratcheting mechanism is working already, but we can't release it yet, so I connected the lever and the pawl with a piece of string. I couldn't simply glue the two parts together because we need this little bit of wiggle room every time the pawl gets pushed down. The last steps were to glue a cover around this mechanism, shape the top of the lever to a handle, and add a crank to the back beam. And that's a pretty good looking loom. To be completely honest, I'm still surprised that I was even able to build this. It took some time, but I think the effort was worth it. Now we can place it inside the hovel, and even though it is a miniature loom, it's still taking up a lot of space in here. At least we solved the mystery of the door on the right here. I like to imagine that because this door didn't open all the way anymore, the peasants decided to simply make a second door. The loom might take up a lot of space overall, but we can still add some tiny details. The first being a really simple stool. I connected the legs with half-lap joints, glued them onto a flat piece of wood, and routed over all the edges. It's not a masterpiece, but it works. Some storage room would also be pretty handy, so I wanted to make a miniature box first by gluing two square sticks onto a flat piece of wood, cutting them off and also cutting away the corners to make them look a little nicer. Prepare for trouble and make it double, glue them together with two more strips and cover the back. This could already pass as a really simple storage box, but then I had another idea. I drilled 3 holes inside the box to put a toothpick inside here, and to wrap some string around it to make this a spool storage. That is best not to be confused with a stool storage. I guess we can fit one more detail inside this corner here, and a shelf definitely never hurts. With these two parts finished, we are done with the first floor, but we're not done with the entire hovel, because the second floor is still empty. There's very little space inside here, but something I really wanted to make, and that fits the theme of the weaver's workshop, is a spinning wheel. Just like the loom, this one was quite challenging to make, and I once again hope that I can explain what I did in a way that's at least somewhat understandable. I started with cutting off a strip from this hardwood, where I drew the outline of the drive wheel onto and made it nice and flat with a chisel. Then I cut it out on the bandsaw, and now it's time for the spokes. My plan was to keep the wheel together like this to drill the holes through the outside and the center in one go. I cut this segment out and made these dots just to line the two pieces up correctly when connecting them with the spokes. This is looking okay, and now we can make the groove to hold the drive band. This here was my quote-unquote prototype. I glued the wheel onto a meat skewer, glued 2 support sticks on each side and glued 2 of these stoppers on the ends. I also glued the wire inside here like this to be able to test a few different lengths of the footman. And I gotta be honest, it took me quite a while to figure out how exactly this should work, and I didn't record any of the process, so here's the version I ended up with. I think right now it makes the most sense to tell you which parts I glued together and which parts are loose. These parts are one solid piece, and these connections are loose or not glued together. If you push the pedal down, it pulls down this piece, which also pulls down this piece and makes the wheel turn clockwise. With the wheel's momentum, this part gets pulled up, pulling up this part as well and lifting up the pedal again, and then it starts over. My version surely isn't perfect, but I also think that it would be really difficult to make a model that is so perfectly scaled that the pedal can be lifted with the momentum of the wheel. So this is as good as it gets for me, but this is not the only part of the spinning wheel, we still need the flyer in the front. I really wasn't sure how to make this one, and my best bet was to draw it onto a piece of hardwood with a hole in it and carve it out. Around here it's getting pretty narrow and I hopefully won't break it. I glued it onto a stick and continued to shape it, and it's not the prettiest part, but it should work. Here's how I connected it to the rest of the spinning wheel. It sits loosely between these 2 pieces of wood and has a stopper on this end to not move around inside here. Now the last step is to add the drive band, for which I also had to try out a few different materials, but this leather strip that I glued together on the ends ended up working the best. Just like the loom is occupying most of the space on the first floor, the spinning wheel is taking up most of the space on the second floor, but that has never stopped me from making more details. I actually planned on putting the spinning wheel in the corner like this and to make a tall wool storage box on this side, but the spinning wheel didn't fit inside this corner. That means that I can't use this box that I've made before the spinning wheel, but there's no problem at all. I cut it in half, made it narrower and wanted to fill it with some wool, for which I cut off a little bit of this fake sheep pelt. From the other half of the box I wanted to make a little stool for the spinning wheel, but I didn't like how that looked, so I made another one, and this is the final detail of Hovel number 7, and with that the final detail of the entire Hovel series, a not so good looking stool. This was Hovel number 7, and I'm finally free! No more Hovels, let's go! I hope you enjoyed this episode, and as always, thanks for watching.